Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. I know it's been a while since I posted on here, but with the semester starting and I was teaching online classes and then back to in-person classes and half in-person, half online, it's, been a lot, been busy. I'm here today because I actually wanted to talk about something that I actually think that I've noticed for the first time this year. I don't think I've ever really seen this before or felt this palpably. So I teach a lot of the incoming freshmen in my human person class. It's the first course in the sequence, so a lot of the incoming freshmen, since they know it's a part of the core, they just go ahead and they take it. So I get a lot of the younger students in my human person class. And one of the things that I think that I noticed this year that I don't think I've noticed before is just how uncatechized they are with regards to the Catholic faith. And I don't even think that most of my students at this point, I don't think they are Catholic. And the ones that are not very well formed. And I don't ask my students about this. Then there's nothing, that I could say that I have empirical data or some kind of metric by which I measure this. But there are some things that, of course, when you're talking about philosophy and when you're talking about Aristotle and St. Thomas in particular, there are certain words, phrases, ideas that they use, that they have, that are so central to their philosophical system that for a well-trained Catholic ought to be setting off a couple of bells, right? Or some things should sound familiar to you. And it's just not, right? Nothing is ringing any bells, no lights are going off, no nothing. And even to a lesser extent, in some of my theology classes, I teach some of the more advanced students in the theology sequence, and even stuff that they should have heard before that they haven't, right? And so it gets me thinking about the notion of Catholic schools, what we exist for, the notion of faith in particular. And what I wanted to talk about today then was why faith is important, right? So faith is an intellectual virtue, right? It's one of the three theological virtues. It's divinely infused by God, right? Faith is not acquired. Faith is given by God, but it's a virtue that perfects the intellect. And as opposed to hope and charity, which perfect the will, faith is a virtue that perfects the intellect. And in intellectual formation, proper intellectual formation is necessary for the formation of the will. Right? So granted, even St. Thomas says it's better to love God than to know him, but that's only because Thomas says God is so far above the intellect that we cannot know God perfectly, but we can direct our will towards him perfectly. But you still can't direct the will towards God unless you know him and assent to the truths given in divine revelation and taught by the church, right? So even hope and charity, Thomas says, in the order of generation in coming to be, faith has to come first. You cannot have hope, you cannot have charity unless you have faith. And primarily then, if faith is one of the virtues that perfects the intellect, primarily where this intellectual formation ought to take place is in Catholic schools. And it seems to me that Catholic schools by now, whether it's elementary, high school, or even at the collegiate level, Catholic schools have become little more than public schools with religion classes, right? We use the same textbooks, we use the same curriculum, we use the same testing standards, we hire the same educational specialists to come do faculty training, right? We're basically public schools that have religion classes. And Pope Benedict XVI, I think when he was here in the United States, when was that? Was that in 2009 or 2010, one of the speeches that he gave? But in one of those speeches, he had mentioned that that's not enough. Right? Just because you have religion classes doesn't make you a Catholic school. It has to go deeper than that. And even these religion classes, right? So the Catholic schools are little more than public schools that have religion classes, but even these religion classes are little more than secular humanism classes with a focus on social justice, sprinkled with a light dusting of the gospel message, right? To kind of give it a little bit of a Christian flavor. Now, working for justice is excellent. It's something that we ought to do. But insofar as working for justice is a prudential exercise, it requires a solid intellectual foundation. Right? So in order to work for justice, you have to have a good intellectual formation. So I talked about these classes are kind of just sprinkled with the gospel message, and it's, well, I don't have time, obviously, in a little short video to talk about, well, what is the gospel message? You can say this. Simply, first and foremost, the gospel message, the gospel is a person, right? It's the revelation of a person, Jesus Christ, and his message of salvation, right? Christ came to reveal himself to us, to die on the cross for us and our sins, that we might be saved, right? That our souls might be saved eternally in heaven, right? That we might see God in the beatific vision in heaven. Right? Not for any kind of earthly salvation, not for any kind of earthly perfection. And so this salvation, this knowledge of Christ and his message of salvation is something that has to be known and assented to with the intellect, and that is the virtue of faith. That is the intellectual, the theological virtue of faith, is the grace that God gives to know this truth and to believe it, to assent to it. So first, I think in order to work for justice, Catholic schools, we need to educate our students in logic, in philosophy, in the sciences, in mathematics, in economics, politics, and history, in order to make them proficient judges in prudential matters, as opposed to just talking about, well, how they feel the world should be. That doesn't matter, right? If you actually want to make the world a better place, and if you actually want to work for justice, you need to have an intellectual foundation in these other fields, right? You need to know how this works, how this is the consequences that's going to come from some of these actions. You need to know how to carry this out. And secondly, in order to avoid the errors of secular humanism and immanentism, we need to catechize our students in the truths taught perennially, always, by the Catholic Church, as given in divine revelation, taught by the Church throughout history, and of course is principally, I think, laid down in the thought of St. Thomas. And only then can you actually talk about forming Catholic students, right? Intellectually formed students, so that their properly formed intellect can direct their will aright, and in that way, then they can work proficiently and effectively in society. But this comes back, I think, and this is kind of what was driving this, was this question of evangelization, because it seems to me that the Catholic Church seems to have just thrown in the towel on the notion of evangelization. Like, this just isn't something we do anymore, right? And did not Christ tell us to go into every nation, to baptize everyone, to teach them, everyone, to observe all of the things Christ commanded us? And so it seems, insofar as if we've given up on evangelization, on actually spreading the message of the gospel and the uniqueness, and yes, the exclusiveness of Jesus Christ, then it seems that we've betrayed fundamentally our Catholic mission. And insofar as we've done that, I think we contribute, and insofar as we do not evangelize according to the truths of the faith, to intellectually form our students so that they might also form their will, insofar as we neglect to do that, I think we also contribute to the increasing ignorance in culture and society, right? So it's not just now that we have malformed Catholics according to the faith, it's that we have malformed human beings, just generically speaking, because we're not doing our job. Right, so it's only going to be a refounding in our identity as Catholics, in the foundation of the gospel, that the gospel is the revelation of the person of Jesus Christ for a specific purpose, and that in order to accomplish that purpose, we need to be intellectually well-formed so that our will can also be well-formed. And only in that light is there going to be a renewal of Catholic education as a whole and a renewal of civil society, so our society and our culture as well. So those are my thoughts for the day. like the video if this was helpful. If not, I understand. Leave a comment down below. As always, let me know if there's something else you'd like for me to talk about, and I'll see you guys next time.